My ex-husband, who caused me a lot of pain, is ignoring our daughter, and my name is Lisa, and I am now 32 years old. A lot has happened in my life over the years, but one event in particular has had a profound impact on my life: my divorce from my ex-husband. Our marriage fell apart, leaving behind many issues and wounds that open up whenever we meet. These reunions bring back memories of the painful moments we went through together and make me re-experience all the things that seemed buried: betrayal, painful separation, lies, and irresponsibility. Most of all, I feel sorry for our daughter, who loves and waits for him, and he has no time for her. We met when I was very young, barely out of high school. He was in his early 20s and had already started his own small business. We both dreamed of a great future, made grandiose plans, but as it turned out later, the reality was much more complicated than we had imagined. Things were going well at first. We settled in his relative's apartment, where we slowly got used to each other. I was immersed in household chores, trying to create coziness and comfort for us. Gradually, I got used to the new way of life, strived to master the household, to take care of him. This period seemed ideal to me because there was a man whom I loved very much. But as time went on, difficulties began. His family, which at first seemed benevolent, began to be overly critical of everything I did. They tried to impose their views, then they didn't like the way I dressed, then I couldn't cook, then I couldn't socialize. Attempts to educate me to their standards, to make me the way they wanted me to be, began to annoy me. I tried to ignore the constant comments and advice, convincing myself that the main thing was that everything suited us. We were really good together. His world, so different from my old one, captured me completely, and I sincerely believed that I didn't need more than that. A few years later, we finally decided to get married. The wedding day was filled with joy, expectations, and plans for the future. Although the ceremony was modest, it left an unforgettable impression. I was incredibly happy standing at the altar in my white dress. However, imperceptibly, something began to change for both of us, although I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. Despite appearances of well-being, our relationship began to crumble. We continued to live together, although our feelings began to fade. Each of us seemed to be living our own lives parallel to each other. The birth of our daughter, Emily, was to change everything. I believed that with a child we would become closer, that Steve would become more responsible and attentive. But the reality was different. Instead of bringing us closer, Emily's birth only exposed our differences. Steve was completely unprepared to be a father. Work, friends, and fun were more important to him. He would come home late at night, spend hours playing video games, and then sleep in until lunchtime in the morning. Our conversations became less and less frequent, and when they did happen, they often ended in arguments. As Emily grew up, I could see how she missed her father's attention, and he remained distant and unavailable. She tried to get his attention, but Steve always made excuses. Every day I felt more and more lonely and frustrated. One day I realized that I was living with a stranger. We stopped understanding each other, or maybe we just never really fit together. Our family was falling apart, and nothing could stop the process. The final blow was his announcement that he was leaving. I was literally destroyed. I tried to convince him to stay, but he was adamant and cold. I felt like my world was falling apart. Left alone with a small child in my arms, without a job and without the slightest glimmer of hope, I felt completely helpless. My husband packed his things and moved in with another woman. This news came as a surprise to me, though perhaps subconsciously I had been expecting something like this for a long time. He had found someone who apparently was able to give him what he wasn't getting. Now he was starting a new life that had no place for me or our daughter. It was painful. The first weeks after Steve left were the hardest. I felt lost, unsure of myself. Every day was a struggle with myself, with my emotions, with the need to move on with my life. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to cope, that I wouldn't have the strength to pick myself up and move forward. His decision to file for divorce soon followed. The process dragged on for many months, making every day an ordeal. The divorce was a real blow to me. I had no idea where to go next or what to do. The days stretched endlessly like a long chain of gray everyday life, devoid of meaning and light. I had to learn to cope with all the responsibilities on my own. It made me feel independent and even more responsible. I started planning my time, dividing my duties and learning to solve problems without help. Having lost all hope, I decided to seek help from a psychologist. Meetings with a professional helped me to regain my mental balance and self-confidence. For many years, my husband belittled me, and now I had to relearn to love and respect myself. Therapy sessions gave me the strength to look at the situation objectively, draw conclusions, and make decisions. Over time, I realized that I needed to pull myself together and start building a new life. I found a job, started self-development, made new friends. This helped me to distract myself from sad thoughts and feel more confident. One of the decisions was to move to another state. It was a step into the unknown, but I believed that the change of scenery would help me start a new life. In a new place, I faced many new challenges, but I also discovered new opportunities. I met a man who turned out to be completely different from my ex-husband. He was attentive, caring, and respectful of my feelings. Gradually, we developed a warm relationship based on mutuality, trust, and support. Emily, growing up, always had hope of seeing her father. Sometimes they talked on the phone, but most of the time he was busy. She remembered her dad's rare visits and waited for him to come and spend more time with her one day. I tried to support my daughter by explaining to her that Daddy was busy but still loved her. She understood, but was still sad and frustrated that she couldn't see him more often. Her ex-husband, Steve, seemed to be getting back on his feet. His business was booming and he started calling more often. Every time we talked, he made sure to mention that he would be coming over soon to spend a few days with Emily. She looked forward to those moments. Even if he called once a month, every promise he made warmed her and gave her hope. Emily was always prepared for his arrival. She planned in advance what they would do, what movies they would watch, what parks they would go to. She wanted to show her father how she had grown, to tell him about her successes, to share her new hobbies. Every time the date of the supposed visit approached, she became especially happy and excited. But alas, his promises often remained unfulfilled. He had urgent business to attend to, or urgent business trips. Each time he canceled a visit, Emily tried not to show her disappointment. She smiled and said it was okay, that he would make it next time. But I could see how hurt she was. How she tried to hide her tears when she went to bed after another failed visit. I tried to support her, to remind her that Daddy loves her anyway. He just has a lot of work to do. But deep down I felt pain for her too. She deserved to have her father around, to give her the time and attention she needed. I watched her grow up, becoming more and more independent and mature. And I felt bad that Steve was missing those moments. Every time he promised to come again, I hoped that this time it would work out. I wanted to believe that he would actually make time for his daughter. But for now, these meetings were just a dream that Emily cherished. One day the meeting did take place. Steve flew in with his date, and they picked Emily up right away. I stood at the door, staring at them as they drove away. Steve dropped the line that he was taking his daughter for 5 days and left. We had agreed it would be a full week for them to spend together, but it seems his plans had changed again. On the 4th day, the phone rang. Steve announced that he was driving Emily back. I was surprised to hear that, since our arrangement had called for her to stay with him for one more day. We had plans of our own, and I expected everything to go as we'd discussed. The cab stopped outside our house, and I saw Emily get out of the car. She looked sad, but when she came to me, she hugged me right away. I held her tightly against me, feeling her little heart beating next to mine. "It's so good to see you," I whispered, stroking her hair. Emily smiled, and in that moment, I realized that nothing could replace the warmth of her home and her mother's love. The goodbye to Steve was quick and cold. I just nodded goodbye to him without saying a word. He got into the cab, and the car started up. Emily stood next to me, watching the car disappear around the corner. Her face was sad, and I could see her trying to hold back tears. We got home, and after a while the phone rang. It was Steve. He started saying how much he loved his daughter and how much he missed her. But I just sighed because I didn't believe his words anymore. How many times had he promised to come and then just disappeared? Emily picked up the phone and answered it briefly. "Dad, thanks for meeting me, but I'm busy right now. We're going to play. I'll talk to you later." She handed the phone back to me and turned away, trying to hide her disappointment. I hugged her and held her tightly against me. She was hurt that her father couldn't pay enough attention to her again. But I knew she was strong and would get through it. Soon my man came in. He brought a new game with him and we headed into the living room. As I sat down on the couch, I felt the tension start to leave. We turned on the game, and after a few minutes we were all laughing and competing with each other. At that moment I realized that despite all the difficulties, we had something more. The real support and warmth of close people.